Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. Welcome to Left Side of the Aisle, and me, Larry Erickson, your host. For the next half hour, I'm going to be talking about something, mostly about one thing that I really think is important enough that you should pay attention to it. If you have any reactions to the show, any questions, whatever, you can send them to me directly. My personal email is whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. Or if you didn't catch that, you can go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be over here a couple of times during the show. You can leave a comment there, or you can get the email address from there if you'd rather. If you do send me email, please include something in the subject line to make sure it's not spam, and please be a little patient about getting an answer. But the other thing about today is welcome to the autumnal equinox. The first day of fall is today, and actually inspired by the fact that I'm doing this on the first day of fall and the change of the seasons, I was thinking about how you'd explain to somebody why there are seasons and how the seasons occur. It all has to do with the tilt of the Earth and its axis on its orbit, but never mind. But that got me thinking about how the change of seasons is a way to explain the difference between weather and climate, short term and longer term. And as a result of that, a lot of things today are going to relate in science in some way. And in particular, I'm going to be spending, frankly, the bulk of the show talking about something I've talked about a lot, but not in a while, which is climate change or global warming. But we're going to start with some good news, as I always like to when I can. A little good news with a science bent to it. The Atlanta State Board of Education recently unanimously voted to update the science standards for public schools in Alabama. That's the first time this has been done in 10 years. And these standards, in fact, have been in development for 3 of those 10 years. Now, the reason this is in any way important is because for the first time, these standards mandate the teaching of climate change and evolution in Alabama public schools. Before this, the schools could simply ignore both topics on the grounds that they are controversial. In fact, since 1995, Alabama science textbooks have had a disclaimer on a little sticker that's put inside the front cover of the books, a disclaimer that describes evolution as a theory, and it describes it in that sense, not in the scientific sense of a theory, but in the popular, everyday sense of, well, it's just somebody's idea. I mean, maybe it's right, maybe it's not. It also says that evolution refers to unproven beliefs, and the sticker concludes with a list of questions intended to create doubts about the validity of evolutionary theory. Now, these new standards still have a disclaimer, but it's actually much better than the old one, and the standards themselves directly support the teaching of evolution and the scientific consensus that climate change is real, it is happening, and that people are the most likely cause. And what's more, with regard to those stickers, there's going to be a review committee meeting in November, I believe it is, and they could, in fact, recommend removing the stickers altogether. So, there's another improvement, by the way, before I forget, is that the standards, which are supposed to go into effect for the 2016-17 school year, the emphasis in science is going to be on experiment, observation, and gathering data, rather than on textbook reading and Q&A. In other words, focusing more on doing science rather than just reading about it. So all of this, I would say, congratulations to Alabama for finally getting into, let's say, the 1990s. And the thing is, why this change, and this is why this is important, why this change, especially even in Alabama, when the State Board of Education includes people who are self-described as having strong religious beliefs? Well, the reason is simple. In the words of Michael Robinson, who's a science specialist at the State Educational Agency, he said, quoting, "We still have to teach what the science is. If students want to go into a science field in college or beyond, they have to have a foundation," unquote. In other words, the state of Alabama finally realized that it has been screwing their own students' futures. While this may be a case of better late than never, that still means it's happening, and better late than never still fits under the heading of good news. In fact, in a way, it's especially good news in light of the broader context in which this is happening, an ongoing, even intensifying reemergence of radical fundamentalism in American life. This has been a strain in and a stain on our history all along, and it has emerged from time to time to be a serious, major political force, which appears to be what's happening now. I mean, we all know about Kim Davis and her flock, who believe that they are in possession of an ultimate truth, which not only overrides all civil law, it also frees them from the oaths they took to uphold that civil law. But did you hear about the case of Courtney Canfield? She's a former employee of the state of Kansas who is suing the state, charging that she is fired because she refused to attend Christian evangelical services being regularly held in the office of Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach. Canfield says that the Assistant Secretary of State, whose name is Eric Rucker, repeatedly and emphatically cited she just doesn't go to church as a basis for firing her. And what about the town of Hawkins, Texas? This town had a big sign reading, "Jesus welcomes you to Hawkins," placed on public land. The city council has decided to take it down in the face of a threatened lawsuit, but the mayor of the town insists there's nothing wrong with it because, he said, Jesus represents billions of people and Jesus is a part of every major religion in the world, so you can't pin one religion on Jesus. Now, leaving aside the fact that even if that were true, it would still be an unconstitutional entanglement of government and religion, I guess there are no Muslims in Hawkins, Texas, or Buddhists, or Hindus, or, for that matter, Jews. Or maybe, which I'm tempted to think is more likely, the mayor of Hawkins, Texas thinks that they just don't count as religions. All right, next up. This is actually also under the heading of good news. The Keystone XL pipeline is something I've talked about a lot. It's intended to carry tar sands, or about the dirtiest, most polluting way to get oil there is, to carry tar sands from Alberta, Canada to refineries in Texas. Now, again, I have talked about this proposed pipeline, including the environmental damage it could do, even in the absence of any spills, because of the pollution caused by the tar sands production itself, and also about the lies and wildly inflated claims that have been made about the number of jobs this project would produce. Well, after stalls, delays, evasions, and more, we have finally gotten a straight answer out of Hillary Clinton about how she feels about the project. And since this is filed under good news, I'm sure you can guess she came out against it. She told a town hall meeting in Iowa on September 22nd that she has a responsibility to you and other voters. She called the pipeline, quoting, "a distraction from the important work we have to do to combat climate change," and also said it interferes with our ability to move forward and deal with other issues relating again to climate change. Senator Bernie Sanders, Clinton's chief rival for the Democratic presidential nomination, has already made clear his opposition, saying encouraging the development of tar sands would be absurd. The amazing Mr. O has been stalling on making a final decision about the pipeline for some time now, but he's expected to make his call by the end of the year. My own suspicion for some time has been that he wants to come out against it, but he's afraid of the political backlash from a Democratic constituency of organized labor, which makes Clinton's statement actually extra good news because she's no longer the presumptive Democratic nominee. She is still the likely Democratic nominee, so her stance can actually give Obama some cover, some political cover, to say no to the project. And actually, so we're talking about good news, I actually have some good news related to climate change. I've given you a lot of doom and gloom about the climate over the time I've been doing this show, and in fact, there will be more doom and gloom a little later in the show. But there is also some good news, or at least hopeful news, so I wanted to give you some of that. For one example, Rebecca Lefton, she's the Director of Policy and Research at Climate Advisors, suggests there is reason to have optimism that there might be a breakthrough at the next International Climate Conference, which is to take place in Paris. It is in December. She points to what she calls, quoting, a new level of cooperation between major emitting economies, particularly China and the U.S., the number one and number two emitters in the world of greenhouse gases. As an example of that, last year, the U.S. and China agreed to cut their emissions by 2030. The U.S. says it will emit 26 to 28% less carbon by that time, and China vowed to have at least 20% of its energy come from clean sources. Toward that end, this year, China is expected to add 18 gigawatts of solar energy capacity to its energy grid. To give you an idea of how much that is, the U.S.'s total solar capacity is around 20 gigawatts. More than 200 of the 523 coal-fired power plants in the United States have closed since 2009, and because of new regulations, it's unlikely a new one will ever open. Coal usage in China has declined by 21% since 2007. And what's more, on a more local level, 30 Chinese and U.S. cities have agreed to cooperate on means to fight climate change. Beyond that, we actually have other local examples, such as the fact that 3 U.S. cities, Aspen, Colorado, Burlington, Vermont, and Greensburg, Kansas, are now 100% powered by renewable energy. 96 cities around the world have pledged to do the same, and actually there are a number of cities around the world which have already achieved that goal. By 2018, all the trains in Holland, all the trains in the Netherlands are going to run on electricity powered by wind. Now, one of the reasons things like this can be happening, and especially happening so fast, is that the cost of renewable energy has been dropping farther and faster than anyone predicted, largely due, bluntly, to government support for such energy and mandates for things like energy efficiency. This is not just the U.S., by the way. Other major economies, including China and Germany, have been doing the same. One result, as an example of the results of this, in March 2011, a computer scientist named Ramez Nan looked at the fact that the cost of solar energy had dropped from about $10 a watt to $3 a watt over a period of 2 decades, and predicted that the cost of solar energy would drop to just 50 cents a watt by 2030. This spring, he admitted he was wrong. The cost of solar energy had already dropped to just over 50 cents a watt 15 years earlier than he predicted. The bottom line of all this can be found in 2 recent studies. Research and engineers from Stanford University and UC Berkeley have developed a state-by-state plan to convert the entire United States to 100% renewable energy by 2050, that is, within 35 years. And I'm going to make a quick sidebar here as a little bit of an ego trip. Back in the early 1980s, I was pushing a plan for replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy under a program I called No One Answer. Because at the time, everybody's talking about, well, we should do solar. Oh, no, solar doesn't work here, so we should do wind. No, wind doesn't work there. So I kept saying, no one answer. Where solar works best, that's where you emphasize solar. Where wind works best, geothermal works best, hydroelectric, wherever is the best for each area is what you focus on in that area. They did pretty much the same thing. They looked at various areas of the country and what contribution various types of renewable energy could make to that area. So basically, it's kind of like, even though they never heard of my ideas, like 35 years later, those ideas are starting to be heard. Actually, all right, anyway, back to our story. Even more significantly than that, there's a new Greenpeace report, which was researched in collaboration with the German Aerospace Center, says it is possible for the entire world to be 100% powered by renewable energy by 2050, including providing access to energy to the third of the world's population that now lacks it. Now, doing this would take an incredible investment, about $1 trillion a year, but it would also reduce fuel costs by a little over $1 trillion a year, which means that this transition pretty much would pay for itself. A renewable energy future for the U.S., for the entire world, is not a pipe dream. It is possible. It can be done. And finally, for this, and one of those small things that may have a bigger meaning and impact, Associated Press, AP, is changing its guidance on how to refer to those who, quoting the memo, don't accept climate science or dispute the world is warming from man-made forces. Now, instead of calling them skeptics or deniers, they're to be called climate change doubters or those who reject mainstream climate science. Now, because the AP style book is often looked to by other news outlets, this could have a real impact on the way climate change is reported in the media. Now, whether or not that'll actually make a difference in the world, well, we'll talk some about that after the break. We'll be right back. And here we are back again. Well, before the break, I said that it is possible to have the whole U.S., in fact, the entire world, on renewable energy by 2050, within like 35 years. The thing is, that won't happen if the goppers here have anything to say about it. Politico recently reported that top Republican lawmakers are planning a wide-ranging offensive to undermine Barack Obama's hopes of reaching an international climate change agreement, something he honestly does seem to want, so credit where it's due, even though he just basically leased the entire Arctic to big oil. Anyway, the thing is, besides the obvious plans to block environmental regulations either in Congress or through the courts, this plan includes outreach to foreign officials by agents of Senate Majority Leader Mitch Fishface McConnell's office with the goal of wrecking the Paris Climate Summit. Not by convincing other nations to oppose a climate deal, because, that would be a lost cause, but rather by convincing them that the goppers here can and will prevent any agreement from going into effect, so why bother making one? It's kind of like the tactic they tried with Iran to try to discourage it from reaching a deal about its nuclear program, basically telling Iran that agreement's a waste of time because the goppers here would keep it from ever going to effect. So far, those other nations about the climate conference have reacted to this pretty much the same way Iran did, which is kind of like, yeah, right. But while the goppers can't really mess up the Paris climate meeting, they can and they will try to do all they can to avoid any environmental reality here at home, which has to be the result of a direct act of will, or more exactly, willful ignorance. I mean, it's gotten to the point where these nanny naysayers, they're not just stupid, they're deliberately stupid. Either that or incredibly selfish, which admittedly would make the deliberately stupid easier to maintain. Just consider some recent stories. July was the hottest month ever on weather records, which date back about 136 years. Not just the hottest July, the hottest month, period. Climatologists at NOAA, that's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, climatologists at NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information are confident that 2015 will go down as the warmest year on record. Now, you want to know how much of a record breaker 2015 is promising to be? Okay, check out this graph. The colored lines, the thin colored lines, are the 6 hottest years on record, plotted month to month. That is, as you go from left to right on the graph, you're going January, February, March, and so on. And each point is the vertical. The vertical axis is how much the temperature for that year, for that month, differed, how much it was above the average for the 20th century for that month. Okay, got that? All right. The thick black line at the top, beating out every other single year, every other single month, that's 2015. And we appear to be heading into a monster El Nino, which could last into the spring of 2016 and could not only wreak weather havoc across significant parts of the world, but also raise temperatures. El Nino years tend to be warmer than others, which means, according to the Met Office, which is the United Kingdom's official weather and climate center, according to the Met Office, 2016 could well break the record about to be set by 2015. Meanwhile, evidence that climate change is responsible for intensifying California's years-long drought, making it as much as 27% worse than it otherwise would have been, just keeps growing. Switch over to the East Coast and then go beyond, over to Greenland, where NASA has discovered that the ice covering Greenland is melting much faster than previously thought. In ice cliffs at the front edge of 3 glaciers they're called outlet glaciers at the coast of Greenland, they're seeing melt rates in the summer of a few meters a day. It's like 10 feet roughly a day. It's dumping cold, fresh water into the ocean, which is already having a measurable impact on ocean currents. At the opposite pole of the Earth, researchers have identified a new and newly important feedback mechanism off the coast of Antarctica that could dramatically speed up melting of the ice on and around Antarctica to the point they say it could raise sea levels 10 feet by 2065. The ultimate point of all this is this. Before the break, I referred to some folks' confidence that 2015 would be the year when humanity got serious about saving its own butt. Unfortunately, 2015 could also be the year it turned out that it was too late, because we had already passed the tipping point where warming has become a self-reinforcing cycle that will be able to continue warming the world for decades to come without any need for us to take part by adding more greenhouse gases. No, global warming will not wipe out mankind. It will not break our species. Nowhere near, but it could well generate environmental and therefore social and therefore political catastrophes that could well break our civilization. I say again, as I have said before, that sometimes I am glad I will not live to see the world which I see coming. All right, after all that, I have to do something lighter, but again, science-y. So we're going to have a quick episode of one of our occasional features. I really should do it more because I actually enjoy doing this. I don't do it enough. It's called And Another Thing. And this is where we step away from politics to talk about some cool science thing or another. All right, here's the thing. You probably know that what we see as color is produced by how our eyes and our brain react to certain wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation, if you prefer light. The longest wavelengths, which we see as red. The shortest ones we see as violet. Those wavelengths that are somewhat longer than we can see, that's called infrared. Those that are shorter than we can see is called ultraviolet. It's been known for a long time that various animals can see in ultraviolet. But until recently, it was thought that other mammals have eyes like ours. But now it's determined that that's not true. And a lot of animals, dogs and cats and other mammals, can see in ultraviolet. Which means, especially at night, if you, for example, are walking your dog and that dog is suddenly staring off into the distance like it can see something you can't, it may well see something that you can't. Yes. And vision here actually serves as a good illustration of how evolution, so listen up you folks in Alabama, how evolution leads to different adaptations related to different, let's call them lifestyles for lack of a better word. Consider the eyes of an eagle. Now, the expression eagle eyes is accurate. Eagle eyes are much, much sharper than ours. The eyes of an eagle, a vision of an eagle is about 25, which means what you can see clearly at 5 feet, it can see clearly at 20. What's more, the eagle's eyes are sort of turned to the side of the head some. with the result, instead of their eyes being directly forward, they're turned to the side of the head some, which really means that their peripheral vision exceeds ours. I mean, we can see back, about this far, okay? An eagle can see like about back this far. They can see a much wider range, field of view is much wider. However, for that same reason, an eagle's binocular vision, which requires both eyes to be able to work together, its binocular vision is a very narrow range directly in front of it. Now, this actually seems to work quite well for an eagle. On the other hand, human binocular vision is actually about this wide, which seems to serve us rather well, too. But getting back to our dogs and cats, their ability to see ultraviolet can actually serve them quite well as predator animals, both because it improves visibility at night, and also the fact that certain evidence of prey, such as urine and urine trails, stand out starkly in ultraviolet light. But there's a trade-off, like there always is in evolution, and we're going to kind of illustrate that here. Our pets, our dogs and cats, their color vision is not as good as ours. Unlike what you may have heard, it's not that they can only see shades of gray. They can see some color, but it's not as good as ours. On the other hand, I'll interject this very quickly. There are certain types of birds. We have 3 types of cone cells that react to different types of light, and that's how we see color. There are some types of birds that have 4, which means they can actually see colors that we can't, which I'm sure serves them quite well as those kinds of birds. But in any event, getting back to our pets, there's a trade-off. There always is a trade-off in evolution. Their color vision is not as good as ours. And what's more, because our eye cells deal with a narrower range of wavelengths, we don't have to respond to as wide a range as they do, we have greater visual acuity. As you can see in some of these here, we have greater visual acuity. You can consider that we have a sharper image of the world around us. Now, if we could only use that greater acuity to see our way clear to doing something about global climate change, things would be a lot better for us and our dogs and our cats. All right, I think I'm going to end up there. I just end up for this week. There's a lot of things I want to talk about this week, but decided this was more important right now, something I haven't talked about in a long time. Something I do intend to do, however, is I want to do And Another Thing a little bit more. I think it's the first one I've done in a very long time, and I want to kind of do that more because I enjoy it. And if you have any feedback about this, do you like And Another Thing? Would you like to see more of that? Drop me a line. Let me know. Tell me what you think, all right? But for the moment, I'm just going to tell you, like I always do, that we will see you next week. In the meantime, you have the best week you possibly can. And as always, peace.